Hey everyone, and welcome to The Deep Read. I'm Mike,
And I'm Emily,
and today we are diving deep into The Anxious Generation.
by Jonathan Haidt.
There's a really fascinating look at, why Gen Z
Yeah.
seems to be facing anxiety and depression at levels we haven't really seen before.
Yeah, it's a really thought-provoking read, and he uses this striking analogy of
Yeah.
growing up in today's world, this hyper-connected world,
Right.
being like growing up on Mars,
Mhm.
like a totally different environment than what humans evolved for.
That's a great way to put it. It
Yeah.
really highlights how much childhood has changed, even in just a few decades.
Yeah.
And he talks about this great rewiring of childhood,
Yeah.
where we've gone from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood.
Right.
What exactly does he mean by that, and why does it matter so much?
He's pinpointing a shift that started in the late 1980s.
Okay.
Less outdoor play, more screen time,
Yeah.
and then boom, smartphones and social media explode in the 2010s.
Yeah.
And childhood is fundamentally altered.
Wow.
And it's not just about kids being on their phones too much.
Right.
It's about how this shift impacts their development
Okay.
on multiple levels, even their brain structure.
So it's not just a generational gripe about kids these days.
Right.
He's saying this is a fundamental rewiring with serious consequences.
Yeah.
He even calls smartphones experience blockers.
Yes.
Can you expand on that? What experiences are they missing out on, and why does it matter?
Think of it this way. Free play is how kids learn to navigate the world.
Yeah.
It's how they develop social skills,
Okay.
how to manage risk, how to be resilient.
Mm.
It's literally the work of childhood, wiring their brains for adulthood.
And when screens replace that free play.
That's where anxiety can take root.
Okay.
Haidt talks about our brains having two modes.
Okay.
Discover mode, which is all about exploration and taking risks,
Mhm.
and defend mode, which
Mhm.
focuses on threats and self-protection. And he argues that overprotective parenting, combined with this phone-based childhood, keeps kids stuck in defend mode.
So instead of building resilience, that ability to bounce back from setbacks,
Yeah,
they're becoming more fragile because they're not getting those real-world experiences.
exactly.
Wow.
And this is where the timing of puberty becomes critical.
Okay.
Adolescence is a period of intense brain rewiring,
Right.
making teenagers especially vulnerable to what they're exposed to.
So you're saying that the virtual world of social media
Yeah,
is shaping their brains at a very impressionable age.
right.
What's the impact of that?
That's a huge question. And Haidt digs into some pretty alarming data.
Okay.
There's a sharp increase in anxiety, depression, even self-harm,
Wow.
particularly in those born after 1996.
Okay.
And he argues that this isn't just about increased awareness of mental health issues. There's
Wow.
something more fundamental going on.
So if it's not just awareness, and it's not external events like economic downturns or national crises,
Right.
then what is driving this mental health crisis?
Haidt connects the dots to this great rewiring we talked about. He points out that the spike in depression among teens began around 2012, just as smartphone use was exploding.
Interesting, but couldn't that just be a coincidence?
Possibly, but Haidt doesn't think so.
Okay.
He argues that the kinds of mental health problems on the rise, those related to anxiety withdrawal,
Right.
what he calls internalizing disorders,
Okay.
are exactly what you'd expect if kids were constantly stuck in that defend mode.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So he's linking the rise of these internalizing disorders to the decline of real-world experiences
Yeah.
and the dominance of screen time.
Right.
But it's not just about individual kids and their phones, right?
Right.
There's a bigger social context here.
Yes.
What does he say about that?
He talks about how social media, while seeming to offer more connection,
Right.
often leads to superficial relationships. Kids are spending less time face-to-face, which is crucial for developing strong social bonds.
Right.
They're more connected online, but more isolated in the real world.
Yeah.
And that feeling of isolation contributes to anxiety and depression.
Right. So there's this paradox
Yeah.
where increased virtual connection actually leads to decreased real-world connection.
Yes.
And that has serious consequences for mental health.
Exactly. It's like a feedback loop.
So we've got this great rewiring leading to kids being stuck in defend mode,
Mm-hmm.
which is amplified by social media,
Right.
which in turn contributes to anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
It's a pretty bleak picture so far.
It is concerning, but Haidt doesn't leave us there.
Okay, good.
He outlines a multi-pronged approach for how we can address this crisis,
Okay.
and that's what we'll be diving into next. We'll look at what governments, tech companies, schools, and of course parents can do
Right.
to create a healthier environment for kids to thrive.
That's a great segue into the next part of our deep dive. But before we move on, what stood out to you most from this first part of the book?
You know what really struck me was Haidt's insistence that this isn't just about kids being weak
Right.
or lacking willpower.
Yeah.
He's pointing to a fundamental shift in the way childhood is structured and how that impacts brain development.
Yeah.
It's a biological argument as much as a social one.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
It's not about blaming kids or parents.
Right.
It's about understanding the deeper forces at play.
Yeah.
And then figuring out how we can create a better path forward.
Exactly.
And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Deep Read.
We left off talking about Jonathan Haidt's argument in The Anxious Generation, how this shift from a play-based to a phone-based childhood has had a huge impact on Gen Z's mental health.
Yeah.
We covered those 4 foundational harms of a phone-based childhood.
Right.
The social isolation, the sleep deprivation.
Yeah. The attention fragmentation and the potential for addiction.
Right.
But now let's get to the solutions.
Yeah.
What does Haidt propose we can do to address this crisis?
He outlines a multi-pronged approach that involves everyone.
Okay.
Governments, tech companies, schools, and of course parents. But he starts by saying, we need to understand this as a collective action problem.
Collective action problem.
Yes.
Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, it's when individuals acting in their own self-interest
Okay.
end up creating a worse situation for everyone. Think of overfishing.
Okay.
Each fisherman thinks, if I catch more, I'll be better off.
Right.
But if everyone does that, the fish population collapses and no one wins.
Okay. I'm seeing the parallel.
Yeah.
So how does this apply to the anxious generation? How are we all contributing to this problem, even when we think we're making the best choices for ourselves or our kids?
Think about the pressure kids feel to get a smartphone.
Okay.
Each kid thinks, if I don't have one, I'll be left out. But if every kid gets one, they all end up spending less time.
Yeah.
Having those crucial face-to-face interactions that are so important for their development.
So it becomes a race to the bottom.
Right.
Where everyone feels like they have to participate.
Yeah.
Even though it might not be in anyone's best interest in the long run.
Exactly.
It feels like a really tough cycle to break.
Yeah.
What does Haidt suggest we do?
He says we need a multi-pronged approach, starting with governments.
Okay.
They have a role to play in setting boundaries and protecting kids.
What would that look like in practice?
Yeah.
What specific actions does he recommend for governments?
One big idea is asserting a duty of care
Okay.
when it comes to tech companies.
Okay.
He says these companies have a responsibility to protect their users, especially children, from harm.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But right now, it seems like there's very little regulation of the tech industry.
Right.
Especially when it comes to kids.
Right.
It's kind of a free-for-all.
Exactly. And Haidt argues that this has to change.
Governments need to step up and set clear rules about how tech companies can design their products and algorithms,
Okay.
especially when those products are being used by kids.
He also talks about raising the age of internet adulthood, right?
Yes.
Why is that so important?
Yeah. Right now, kids can often sign up for social media at 13.
Right.
But Haidt argues that that's way too young.
Okay.
The research shows that the teenage brain is still developing well into the late teens and early 20s.
So 13-year-olds might not have the cognitive maturity to handle the complexities and pressures of social media.
Exactly. Making 13 the age of consent for the internet exposes them to all sorts of risks when they're still very vulnerable.
Okay.
Haidt suggests raising that age maybe to 16 or even 18 to better align with what we know about brain development and the potential downsides of excessive screen time.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Any other actions he recommends for governments? He stresses the need for better age verification systems.
Okay.
Right now, it's way too easy for kids to lie about their age.
Right.
And access content that's not appropriate for them.
Right. We all know how easy it is to click that I'm 13 or older box.
Exactly.
Even if you're not.
So he proposes stronger age verification to make it harder for kids to bypass the rules.
Okay.
He even suggests a system of device-based age verification.
Okay.
Where parents could flag their child's devices, which would trigger age restrictions automatically.
So it wouldn't be about verifying your age every time you go online.
Right.
It would be about flagging the device itself.
Right. That way, even if a kid tries to access a restricted site or app, the system would know they're underage and block them.
Okay.
It seems like a good balance between protecting kids and giving them some privacy.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
What about the real world?
Yeah.
Is there anything governments can do to make the real world more appealing to kids?
Absolute.
To give them alternatives to screens?
Haidt talks about investing in public spaces that encourage outdoor play and exploration.
Okay, like what?
Parks, playgrounds, community centers. We need to make those spaces safe, accessible, and engaging for kids.
So it's about creating more opportunities for kids to experience the joy of free play in a safe environment.
Exactly. And it's not just about physical spaces.
Okay.
Haidt also suggests supporting programs that promote independence and responsibility. Things like wilderness programs or gap year programs that give kids a chance to challenge themselves outside their comfort zones.
It sounds like he's advocating for a more balanced approach to childhood.
Right.
One that recognizes the value of both structured activities and unstructured free time.
Yeah.
Both the virtual world and the real world.
You got it.
Okay.
He's saying we need to help kids develop those essential life skills.
Right.
Resilience, problem solving, social intelligence. That will serve them well no matter what path they choose in life.
Okay, so we've talked about governments.
Right.
But what about tech companies?
Yeah.
What role can they play in all of this?
Yes.
Can we really expect them to change their ways?
Right.
Especially when their current business model is so successful.
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
Haidt acknowledges that tech companies are driven by profit.
Yeah.
And right now, their business model is based on engagement and attention.
Right.
But he argues that we can change those incentives through regulation and consumer pressure.
So it's not about demonizing tech companies.
Right.
It's about creating a system where they're encouraged to act more responsibly.
Right. It's about shifting the incentives.
Okay.
He points to examples from other industries, like the regulations that were put in place to improve food safety or car safety.
Right.
Those regulations weren't always popular with businesses, but they led to safer products and a healthier society.
So we need to start seeing the mental health of young people as a public health issue. That requires collective action, just like we did with food safety or car safety.
Right.
That's a powerful idea.
It is. And Haidt outlines specific actions that tech companies can take.
Okay.
Like making their algorithms less addictive, limiting notifications, providing better parental controls.
Right.
He even suggests that social media companies could limit their data collection on minors.
Okay.
Or offer versions of their platforms designed specifically for young users.
Those are all great ideas. It seems like it would take a major shift in thinking.
Yes.
For tech companies to embrace those changes.
Right.
They'd have to put the well-being of their users above profits. That's a big ask.
It is, but Haidt believes it's possible.
Okay.
He points to the growing awareness of the harms of social media, especially among young people themselves.
Right.
He thinks consumer pressure coupled with government regulation could force tech companies to change their ways.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
It sounds like he's optimistic that we can create a more humane digital landscape.
He is, and he also points to the role of individual tech leaders who are starting to speak out about the need for ethical design and a more humane approach to technology.
Okay, so we've talked about the roles of governments and tech companies.
Yes.
Now what about schools?
Yeah.
Where do they fit into all of this?
Haidt is a big advocate for phone-free schools.
Okay.
He argues that smartphones have become a huge distraction in the classroom.
Right.
Hurting both learning and social interaction.
I can see that.
Yeah.
It's hard to focus when you're constantly checking your phone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it creates a divide where some kids are plugged into the virtual world,
right,
while others are trying to engage in real-world learning.
Yeah.
So he suggests policies that ban smartphones during school hours.
Okay.
Either by having kids store their phones in lockers,
right,
or by using technology that disables phones during class.
That would be a big change for a lot of schools.
Yeah.
I imagine some students and parents might push back against that.
There would definitely be some resistance. Yeah.
But Haidt argues that the benefits outweigh the costs.
Okay.
He cites research showing that students learn better and are less stressed when they're not constantly distracted by their phones.
And it creates a more level playing field where everyone is equally present and engaged.
Exactly.
It also frees up more time for face-to-face interaction.
Yeah.
Which we know is so crucial for social and emotional development.
Right. He wants schools to bring back the joy of childhood.
Okay.
To become more playful, more unstructured, free play during recess before school, even during class time.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about letting kids be kids.
Right.
And giving them the space to learn and grow through play.
And he points out that free play actually helps kids achieve those social-emotional learning goals that schools are increasingly focused on.
Right.
But in a more natural, organic way.
So instead of trying to teach social skills through structured lessons, just let kids play and figure those things out on their own. Exactly. And he also emphasizes the importance of risk-taking and autonomy in childhood.
Okay.
He argues that overprotective schools are actually hurting kids by shielding them from the kinds of challenges that help them build resilience and confidence.
He talks about a project called Let Grow, right?
Yeah.
What's that about?
Let Grow encourages schools to give kids more independence by giving them homework that involves doing something on their own. Like walking the dog, making a meal, running an errand. It's about empowering kids to take on age-appropriate challenges and build self-reliance.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about trusting kids to handle more responsibility and giving them the space to learn and grow through those experiences.
Right, and he points to schools that have successfully implemented these types of changes and have seen positive results. Better mental health, academic performance, and overall well-being among their students.
So it's not just about protecting kids from harm.
Right.
It's about equipping them with the skills and experiences they need to thrive in the world.
Exactly. Schools play a huge role in that process. He also talks about the need to re-engage boys who are falling behind in school and are more likely to drop out.
One of his suggestions is hiring more male teachers.
He thinks having more male role models in school, especially in the early grades, could help boys see themselves as learners and stay engaged.
Interesting. What about the learning environment itself?
Yeah.
Does he have any recommendations for how schools can be redesigned to better support kids' mental health and well-being?
He is a big proponent of recess and outdoor learning, especially for boys who might benefit from more active hands-on learning experiences.
Right.
He says we need to stop seeing recess as a frivolous break from learning and recognize it as a crucial part of child development.
It goes back to that idea that play is the work of childhood.
Exactly. He thinks we need to rethink the whole school environment. Prioritize play, exploration, real-world learning.
Right.
Not just for kids' mental health, but for their academic success, too.
This has been a really insightful conversation so far.
Yes.
We've covered the roles of governments, tech companies, and schools.
Right.
What about parents?
Yeah.
What can they do at home to help their kids navigate this phone-based world?
That's what we'll be diving into in the final part of our deep dive on the anxious generation.
Can't wait to hear more about that. See you next time. Welcome back to The Deep Read. We've been exploring The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, trying to understand this surge in anxiety and depression among Gen Z. What role technology plays.
Right.
We've talked about actions governments, tech companies, and even schools can take. But now let's get to the heart of it. What can parents do? They're on the front lines raising kids in this digital world.
Right. It feels like a minefield sometimes.
Yeah. How much screen time is too much?
Right.
When should we give them a smartphone? It's hard to know what the right answers are.
Haidt provides a really helpful framework for parents. He says, think of yourselves as gardeners, not carpenters.
Gardeners. I like that analogy. But what's the difference? Why is that distinction so important?
So a carpenter has a very specific blueprint. They're trying to shape the wood into a predetermined form.
Right.
But a gardener creates an environment where the plant can thrive naturally. They provide the right soil, sunlight, water, but they allow the plant to grow in its own way.
So instead of trying to control every aspect of our kids' lives, we should focus on creating a space where they can develop their own strengths and resilience.
That's the idea. It's about trusting the natural process of development and providing the support they need to flourish. And Haidt offers some practical tips for how parents can become better gardeners in this digital age.
All ears. Let's get to those tips.
Yeah.
I think a lot of parents are looking for some concrete advice right now.
One of the biggest ones is delaying the smartphone as long as possible, ideally until high school. He says smartphones can be incredibly disruptive to a child's development, especially during those middle school years.
I can see that middle school is already such a socially and emotionally intense time.
Right.
Add in the constant connectivity and pressures of social media.
Yeah.
And it's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. He even compares giving a child a smartphone to giving them their first cigarette.
Oh.
A bit dramatic, maybe.
Yeah.
But it emphasizes the potential for harm.
I think the point he's making is that smartphones like cigarettes can be addictive and harmful, especially for young people who don't yet have the self-regulation skills to manage them.
Right. And remember those 4 foundational harms we discussed earlier.
Right.
Social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction.
Yeah.
Smartphones amplify all of those.
It's like giving them access to a whole arsenal of distractions and temptations before they have the maturity to handle them responsibly.
And Haidt argues that those early years are critical for building a solid foundation.
Right. For developing social skills, resilience, and independence.
Yeah.
Before they're exposed to all the pressures of the digital world.
So by delaying the smartphone, we're giving them more time to develop those essential skills before throwing them into the deep end of the digital pool.
Exactly. It's about creating a protected space for them to grow and mature before exposing them to all those digital forces.
Okay.
And it's not just about the smartphone itself. It's about limiting overall screen time.
Okay.
Even before the smartphone enters the picture.
So even younger kids who don't have smartphones yet, we should still be mindful of how much time they're spending in front of screens, TVs, tablets, computers, all of it.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that includes being mindful of our own screen habits.
Right.
Kids are like little sponges. They absorb everything they see us do.
So if we're constantly on our phones, checking emails, scrolling through social media, they're going to pick up on that and think it's normal behavior. Exactly. So we need to model healthy tech habits ourselves. Haidt talks about creating no device zones in the house, times, and places where screens are off limits.
Like the dinner table.
Yes.
Make it a family rule that everyone puts their phones away during meals so you can actually connect to have conversations without distractions.
That's a great example. And what about bedrooms?
Yeah.
Haidt has strong feelings about screens in bedrooms.
He does. He strongly recommends against allowing screens in bedrooms.
Yeah.
Especially for younger kids.
Right.
It can interfere with sleep, expose them to inappropriate content, and make it harder for them to disconnect from the digital world.
It's like bringing those digital distractions into their most personal space, the place where they should be resting and recharging.
That's a great point. It's about creating boundaries, both physical and mental, between the digital world and the real world.
Right. And speaking of boundaries, Haidt emphasizes the importance of setting clear limits on screen time in general.
Okay.
Decide how much is appropriate for your child's age and development, and then stick to those limits.
I can imagine that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Kids are constantly pushing those boundaries.
Yeah.
And it's tempting to give in, especially when you're busy or stressed.
It's definitely a challenge. This is where parental controls can be helpful.
Okay.
Haidt suggests using them to block certain apps or websites to limit screen time or to monitor your child's online activity.
So those tools can be useful.
Right.
But it's not a magic bullet.
Right.
It sounds like Haidt is saying that technology can't solve a problem that ultimately requires human connection and communication.
Exactly. Parental controls can be part of the solution, but they're not a replacement for having open, honest conversations with your kids about technology.
Right.
About the potential risks and benefits, about setting healthy boundaries.
It's about being an involved and informed parent, not just a tech enforcer. It's about teaching them how to navigate the digital world safely and responsibly.
Right. And it goes beyond just setting limits and boundaries. Haidt encourages parents to actively promote activities that build real-world skills and relationships.
Okay, so things like
outdoor play sports, hobbies, volunteering, spending time with friends and family in person, all those things that we know are essential for well-being, but that often get pushed aside in our busy, tech-saturated lives.
Exactly. It's about creating a rich and balanced life for your kids, one that isn't dominated by screens.
Yeah. And he also talks about finding ways for teenagers to nurture and lead.
Yeah.
Encouraging them to get part-time jobs, volunteer, mentor younger kids.
Those are great ideas. It gives them a sense of purpose, responsibility, and connection to something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
And it provides opportunities for real-world interaction and social connection, which we know is so important for their mental health.
And of course, the most important thing is to model those healthy habits ourselves.
Right.
Walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Be the change you want to see in your kids. It's such a simple idea, but it's so powerful. Kids learn more from what we do than from what we say.
Absolutely. So be mindful of your own screen time. Make a conscious effort to unplug and engage in other activities. Show them that there's more to life than just being glued to a screen.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. What does it all mean? What's the key takeaway for listeners who are trying to raise kids in this digital world?
I think Haidt's message is ultimately one of hope and empowerment.
What?
He's not saying technology is evil, but he is saying that we need to be more intentional about how we use it, especially when it comes to our kids.
It's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
That sweet spot where technology enhances our lives without dominating them.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we have more control than we think. We can shape the digital landscape, both for ourselves and for our children.
And it's about remembering that we're not in this alone. Yeah. It's a collective challenge that requires all of us, parents, educators, policymakers, tech companies, to work together to create a healthier and more humane digital world for the next generation.
That's a great point. To end on Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation is a powerful and timely book that offers a roadmap for change.
Yeah.
If you haven't already, pick up a copy and join the conversation. And if this deep dive has resonated with you, please subscribe to The Deep Read and share this episode with anyone who cares about the future of childhood.
And here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about this. If we reimagine childhood to prioritize play, exploration, and real-world connection, what kind of adults might Gen Z become? What kind of world could we create together?
That's a question worth pondering. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Read. We'll see you next time.